Well, as we do enter the last hour of trade this Friday afternoon, let's get a wrap on what investors have been up to in the markets this week. Gemma Dow joining us now from NAB. Gemma, great to have you in. I know every reporting season we ask you the question, does that spur interest from investors? And it's kind of a mixed answer every time.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a massive uplift in volumes. People don't get super excited about reporting season per se. We know if we put reporting season in a headline for content, people just go straight past it. They have no interest at all. So it certainly isn't a term that gets people excited, but volumes spike. And I think the thing that's most fascinating at this point in time is the conviction on the trades. I'm seeing there's none of this 50-50 business buy sell splits, right? It's all 90% plus one way or the other. People are watching closely the stocks that they're interested in. They're looking at the response to the results, and that's what they're buying or selling really, really aggressively. So it's the volumes that spike based on very specific price movements, and they spike in very clear directions one way or the other, depending on what's happening with the stock in question.
So, Gemma, you said it's nothing to do with reporting season, yet it's banks. Is that because banks are always front of mind of investors, or have they noticed the news talking about sort of CBA, NAB dropping?
I think the critical thing with banks is that they're so widely held, right? They're widely held right across our base. A lot of that is historical. So we have so many investors who picked up banks, in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. They've held banks for decades, literally, in many cases. And we also saw just incredibly aggressive buying of banks during the COVID dip. All four of the big four were in our top 10. People love them. They were really enthusiastic buyers during that period. They've done extremely well. So when they see price movements in the banks, they've got something to move on. They'll either add to their positions or they'll trim if they feel they've done extremely nicely. And this week they've just had something to trade, right? They've got a position to move on. NAB is our biggest holding. I've made that comment before and made the point that it seems to be very specific to our platform. So NAB has had a bounce. It was a result that was very, very much liked by the analysts. Anything like that is considered a fantastic opportunity by our guys to trim really aggressively. So we saw a 90+% sell on NAB, and that was both value and the number of shares traded, which is really interesting. You don't usually get both of them at the same time. Sometimes you get some very high value traders who'll move that skew. But in addition to that, very high average trade sizes, like $50,000 on average, which for something like a bank is atypical. Like, it tends to be a bit lower because there's far more people moving around in it at the lower end. So NAB's been a massive sell, CBA's been a massive sell, and it's mostly people who've done extremely well who were buying it 2 years ago at, in NAB's case, $14, right? They've had a wonderful run. They're very happy to get out at this price.
Gemma, talking of selling, I understand FMG has been on the list of the sellers this week.
It's always in the trades, right? I don't want to talk about it all the time because it gets extraordinarily boring, but it is just a really aggressive sell at the moment. And again, it's an example of one that we had a hell of a lot of very high value traders buying at $14, $15 last year when it fell off. At the moment, I mean, price is amazing for those guys. They've done extremely well, and it's a 90% sell, which is very unusual. It's an actively traded stock, so we usually see the sort of 50-55 split. It's it's really close to even a lot of the time. It's a massive sell at the moment, so a lot of people are feeling that this is a good price, right? They've done well. They're happy to get out at this point.
And of course, the other sell, which I thought was interesting, is the travel sector. We all saw them pop after that announcement of opening the borders. Was that the reason to get out again?
Yeah, again, it's exactly like reporting season. It's the price movement that people get really excited about. And particularly if it's something like travel stocks that people bought, I don't want to say speculatively, but all three, Webjet, Qantas and Flight Centre, were in our top 10 stocks during COVID. Investors were so excited to see them hit to pieces during COVID. They bought enormous quantities during that period, absolutely enormous. So all three were in the top 10. I wouldn't anticipate any of those stocks being in the top 10 at any other period, but between March and July in 2020, they were all a massive buy. So you've got people sitting on a year and a half, maybe 2 years worth of gains. They get a little pop and they trim. They know that they've got their CGT discount locked in. They've done really well. Maybe this is their one little window to sell at this price and they're going to get out. So we saw huge selling this week of those guys. It doesn't surprise me. they're obviously very volatile given the way COVID has moved. They took longer to stabilise, I think, than quite a few people were expecting. And so perhaps we'll see more movement. But for now, investors go to the sidelines. They've done really well.
Gemma, what are we seeing in the healthcare space?
So this one is not going to surprise anybody. CSL used to be one of our most sort of tightly held stocks. It was only about 10% of our investors who held it. The reason it was only held by such a small number is most people felt it was just too expensive. CBA had the same problem where investors, and so did Macquarie, people were like, I'm not paying that much. I'm not paying that much for a healthcare stock. I'm not paying that much for Macquarie. Like, it couldn't possibly continue to perform at this level. So we didn't see buying in CSL when it was running up past $300. At 250, I think the average price that people were buying yesterday was around 253, 90+% buy. People love it at this price. They've had now 3 opportunities over 12 months to pick it up at this price, and that's around the price it dropped to during COVID. So it's really 2 years that it's been around this mark. Obviously bounced back up above 310, right? So it's not stayed down there. But whenever it comes back to this level, we see massive buying. And as a result, it's really spread across the base. So a stock that was only held by a small number of people a while back is now very widely held because people have taken the opportunity to pick it up. They keep wanting it to bounce back above that 300 level. If we do see that, we'll see selling.
Well, sticking with the names, Gemma, that everyone knows, but of course overseas. Meta smashed, PayPal smashed, Tesla's always in the headlines. What's going on in your world?
Yeah, it's just really interesting. You would imagine in this really volatile period for tech stocks that you'd see this massive spike in demand for tech stocks from our guys who have that very contrarian buy the dip mentality in Australia. We haven't really seen that, nowhere near as much as I would have expected. So there's obviously some concern about going offshore and buying those tech stocks right now from our guys. Maybe it's a currency issue, maybe it's just that they feel there's a lot further for some of them to fall. But Meta's the one they've been buying. So they've obviously been seeing the headlines that it's been hit really hard. It's one of the rare times that Tesla has not been our most traded stock and not been our most bought stock. The average trade size is pretty small though. You're talking about 8,500 Australian dollars. So it's pretty small. It's not exactly like people putting 100 grand behind it, but they're picking it up at this price. And we are seeing some trimming in Tesla, which is still not doing too poorly at all. And for most of our investors, if they've got Tesla, they've just done exceptionally well out of it. So some of them are trimming at this price, which is interesting. They tend not to trim Tesla. They just want to hang on to it and maybe buy some more.
Gemma, great to see you this Friday as always. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining us from nabtrade.
Thanks, guys.